This is a story about spring cleaning. And we have a new pharmaconutritional tool to talk about, which is called ZinoGene Plus. The whole point of spring cleaning is that it's not cleaning that you do all the time. It's not a regular thing. You have your routine, you do your maintenance thing, and then maybe as the year turns and the daylight starts to get stronger again, and it starts poking into parts of the flat or the house or the condo that you didn't see clearly enough before. You see that the dirt and the grime is being piling up, and that's when you start thinking about spring cleaning. Now, I've been around for a long time and I've met lots of people. I've never met anyone who looks quite so keen on spring cleaning as this lady does. Creating rid of clutter and dirt, and the industry has provided all kinds of things that we use to clean chrome and ceramics and worktops and this and that and the other, and we're going to go a little bit deeper than that. When we talk about spring cleaning, we're talking about removing debris that builds up in the body, replacing old with new. We're actually talking, if you look about that clock carefully enough, you'll see we're talking about turning time backwards. We're talking about reversing certain aspects of the aging process. Now, you can't just slow or reverse aging because there's a lot of things that are going on as you age. There are many subroutines, and here are a few of them. It is not a complete list. I can go through some of these quickly. For those of you who are interested, we lose proteostasis, which means overall control of the quality of the proteins that you're forming in your cell. Reduced autophagy, which means your housekeeping systems within the cell and to some extent between cells start to run down. You accumulate damaged proteins and other macromolecules in the cell, and that's not a good idea because when that happens, different parts of other types of machinery start going wrong. This is not a good idea. You're moving towards senescence. You're moving eventually towards cell death. Most of you have heard about loss of telomeres and mitochondrial damage. Those are other parts of the process. Changing patterns of DNA methylation. This is known as the epigenetic clock. Parts of the DNA are methylated and silenced and other parts aren't. That pattern changes over time. Reduced expression of mRNA splicing factors. So you have introns and exons, and some of the bits of DNA are silent and some are coding. You don't want to have all of that in your mRNA. So the mRNA that you produce is cut and spliced just as if you were working with videotape. And then growth factors start to peter out, and stress resistance, we become less good at that because stress responsive proteins called alarmins, we don't get quite so good at making those when we need to. Your metabolism starts to slow. Various hormone patterns start to change, and we accumulate senescent cells. These are aged and dying cells, which shouldn't really be sticking around, but they do. And perhaps we run out of stem cells. Those are the cells that are formed in other parts of the body, in the bone marrow, which would normally be on hand to replace the damaged cells, but maybe none of that is working terribly well. Anyway, turns out that all of these subroutines are slowed, impaired, and damaged by three factors, and those are the things that you see in the bottom line marked out in red: increased chronic inflammation, type B malnutrition, and dysbiosis. And you've heard me talk about all those things before, and those are all caused by the modern ultra-processed diet, which is why we have such terrible public and increasingly individual health in society today. It turns out that if we can reduce those problems of inflammation, type B malnutrition, and dysbiosis, we can make everything better, but that won't necessarily deal with this issue of accumulating senescent cells and having not quite enough of the stem cells that are needed to replace the aging cells. Until now. Now we actually do have a new tool that we can use to address this very problem. Time to define some terms. What are these senescent cells? Well, cells will continue to function for a while. Many of them have a finite lifetime, and as they get towards the end of that lifetime, those cells which are operating properly and correctly will switch on what is known as the apoptosis sequence. They commit suicide. They remove themselves from the stage. Thank you for your services. The problem is that some of these cells, they get towards the end of their life, and they do not switch themselves off. Instead, they stick around. At this point, they're not really helping you because they're using resources, scarce resources, but they're not producing anything positive. They're not contributing. They're no longer functional. They produce inflammatory factors. This is known as the SASP, the senescence-associated secretory phenotype. Basically, what that means is these are pumping out compounds, messenger compounds, which fuel local inflammation. And that in turn leads to increasing damage to local tissues, and not a good thing to have because it can also accelerate the growth of cancers. So it's really not a good idea to have too many of these senescent cells accumulating inside your tissues and inside your bodies. And in fact, the increase in senescent cells that generally does occur as you get older, especially if you're getting older in today's deeply unhealthy culture, it drives all of those aging subroutines that I listed in the previous slide. And those numbers 1 to 15, well, there are some of the scientific references to support this. There's a whole lot of scientific evidence to support this. So let's see if we can't find a way of removing those senescent cells and lightening the load. To do that, we can use tools which are called senolytics. These are compounds which very specifically kill off or remove the senescent cells while leaving healthy, functional cells unaffected. Do they work? Is this just a fanciful concept? Can we turn it into reality? Well, I think we can. There is a lot of preclinical evidence showing that if you use the right senolytic compounds, you can delay, prevent, or alleviate frailty, and all those other conditions that you see in that list there. There seem to be some huge health benefits. We're talking about serious life extension. You can improve brain function, cognitive function, so that the aged animals that receive these senolytic compounds clearly are thinking better and faster. In fact, it turns the clock back to their middle years, and in some cases even earlier. If it was just preclinical data, I don't think I'd be standing here. I wouldn't be convinced. But now, what we see is clinical trials starting to produce results. And in the early pilot studies, using senolytic agents, the results show that the numbers of senescent cells in the tissues are reduced, there is reduced inflammation and reduced frailty, and the results have been so promising that further clinical trials are now underway in treating type 2 diabetes, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which is a very unpleasant respiratory condition, Alzheimer's disease, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, eye diseases, and a range of other clinical diseases. These compounds have a lot of clinical potential. So what do we do? What are these compounds? Where do we find them? What are they? Well, there's a lot of synthetic pharmaceutical approaches that are being examined. So dasatinib is one, which from your name you can tell it's biological. Navitoclax, geldonomycin, they just roll off the tongue, don't they? And then some familiar names such as digoxin, novalbane. These are old cardiac glycosides that we use to treat conditions of the heart, but it turns out that they have some senolytic activity as well. Some vaccines are currently being trialed. That's very much ongoing at the moment. And some researchers are using very interesting, very complex nanoparticles to deliver microtoxins to senolytic cells. You can find a lot of research like this if you go peering around in PubMed. I'm not convinced that this is the way to go. I think that with all of these synthetic, man-made approaches, there is always, and we know this from the pharmaceutical sector, the risk of serious toxicity, serious adverse effects. No matter how good the science, we're throwing very clumsy synthetic spanners into the incredibly complex working of the human metabolism. I prefer to work with natural compounds. And it turns out that there's quite a few of those which have really very good senolytic activity. Many of those are polyphenols. Fisetin, quercetin, luteolin, curcumin, others. All of these are polyphenols derived from various fruits, vegetables, and spices. And there are a couple of alkaloids currently in the frame as well. Piperolongumine, one or two others like that. Piperlongumine is an interesting compound. As its name implies, it's from piperlongum, or the long pepper. And all of these compounds, the polyphenols and piperlongumine, have a whole range of other very interesting and really important biological effects in the body, which, as I said, you can find if you have an interest in this sort of thing by using these words as search terms in the PubMed database. What the data increasingly shows is that the senolytics work best when used in combination. And that's been very much in our thinking when we put together ZinoGene, which combines a range of these natural senolytic compounds. Aren't we forgetting the stem cell? You might be asking yourselves. No, absolutely not. Foremost in our thinking. The problem is that stem cells are really, really complicated. You've got embryonic stem cells, neonatal stem cells, adult stem cells. You've got unipotent, multipotent, omnipotent, pluripotent. And if you are a scientist working in this area, you can take stem cells and transform them into pluripotent, which, as the name implies, gives them a whole range of functionalities and abilities to work in different tissues. But we don't do anything as complex as that. We're simple folk. And what I prefer to do is to work with the adult stem cells that all of you already have in your own bone marrow. The only problem seems to be that as we get older, and at a time when actually we could use more of these stem cells, those stem cells just stay waiting for the call, which they don't hear. They just rest in the bone marrow, where they're not really doing much good to us. And this is where the second part of our equation comes into play. I've long been interested in this issue, whether we could find a way of sending a call out to those resting stem cells and telling them to get active, go into the tissues where they are actually needed. The answer is yes, we can do that. What does it take in order to achieve something like this? It takes fucoidans. These are very interesting compounds, polysulfated oligosaccharides, that we derive from seaweed. They're non-stick compounds. These are the compounds that make seaweed so very slippery. So what do these fucoidans do? They are able to displace these resting stem cells from the bone marrow, from their long sleep in your long bones, and reconfigure them. There is some evidence to support this in such a way so that once they hit the circulation, they are ready to get their hands dirty and go to work. There is some evidence to support this. This comes from Japan, where these fucoidans have been shown to improve the body's ability to repair damaged tissues. So in periodontal disease, they've been shown to encourage the re-anchoring of teeth that had become loose. This is quite a complex issue, and this may not all be about tissue repair, direct tissue repair. Other mechanisms are at play here, but this is very promising, and it's very much part of our thinking here. The fucoidans are also being looked at in terms of their applications in other non-communicable diseases, such as osteoporosis, vascular and eye diseases, and they also seem to be extremely helpful in assisting people to deal with the otherwise unbearable adverse effects associated with chemotherapy. And the fucoidans inhibit biofilm. This is also part of their non-stick, Teflon-like characteristic. Now, biofilm is important because this is what develops as bacteria grow in parts of your body where they should not be growing, such as on your teeth. Plaque, which grows on your teeth in between brushing, is biofilm. Bacteria produce the biofilm, and it allows them to stick on the teeth. It allows them to thrive and grow. And when they grow to a certain point, they start producing acids, and that's what erodes your teeth. And that's also what contributes to periodontal disease. If you eat fucoidans on a regular basis, the biofilm is disrupted. The plaque will shrink away from your teeth, and in time, tartar, which is mineralized plaque, will fall off the roots of your teeth as well. This is profoundly positive. But biofilm, under certain circumstances, can form in other parts of the body too. For example, on artificial hearts. or artificial joints because they're not immunocompetent. If bacteria ever settle on them, they can grow, form biofilm, which is not a very good idea at all. And from my way of thinking, fucoidan's ability to inhibit biofilm may well produce other benefits in the body. This is not yet proven. It's something that is being actively researched at this moment in time. So the general approach is this. As we get older, we're accumulating more of these senescent cells, which you do not want too much of. We want to try and brush them away with the senolytic, the natural senolytic compounds, the polyphenols from all those fruits and spices. And then what we want to do is to replace them with new cells, shaken loose from your bone marrow. Very experimental. We're looking way out over the edge of what is already known here. We're not quite sure what we're going to see, but I'm interested in finding out. And I'm very excited about what I think we're going to find out. But it isn't just necessarily a sprinkling. Think of this as something you can do in autumn, in the winter, perhaps in the summer too. This is just the beginning of something very new, something that could turn out to be very big. Quite an adventure. I hope you'll join us. Thank you.